Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Denison webinar, Employee Engagement and Organizational Culture, What's the Difference? My name is Karen Luce. I'm the Director of Learning and Development here at Denison, and I'm your host for today's webinar. Today's program has sparked a lot of interest from our audience, and we know you're all eager to get into our discussion of culture and engagement. So quickly before we get started, I wanted to go over just a couple of technical things with you. We will present today for about 40 minutes and then use the remainder of our time to answer questions that have been sent in by our audience. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a control panel that you can use to send in your questions. We ask that you please send in your questions throughout the presentation rather than waiting for the end. This gives us an opportunity to go through them and make the most of that question and answer session. We will try to get through as many of your questions as we can, and we do apologize if we don't get to your specific question, but we'll make every effort to follow up with you after the webinar. I also want to let everyone know that a copy of today's webinar and the PowerPoint slides will be archived on our website, so you can view them again or share them with others within your organization. We'll email each of you once they are available. Now, to get started, I would like to introduce to you Drs. Dan Denison and Lindsey Kotrba, both of Denison Consulting. Dan, as many of you know, is the CEO and founding partner of Denison Consulting. He's the author of the Denison model and has written, spoken, and consulted extensively on organizational culture and performance. Lindsey Kotrba is the Director of Research and Development here at Denison. She works directly with our clients on a variety of projects and also speaks and writes on culture and performance for us. They're both here to discuss organizational and engagement for us and the importance of it for organizational performance. And with that, I will turn it over to our presenters today.
That's great. Thank you very much, Karen. And we're really delighted to have you all online with us this morning. It's always better to be live and in person. But it's also great to be able to connect with you all from all around the world to talk about this important topic. As our practice has grown, we have competed more with organizational surveys of all sorts. You know, our origins are around the performance research that I did years ago on linking corporate culture and business performance, and I've really built the practice around using that as a tool to change and develop organizations. But as we've done that, we keep bumping into different forms of the annual employee survey. And in most cases today, those are often called engagement surveys, sometimes by other names, satisfaction surveys, employee voice surveys, global voice surveys. But since there's a lot of different approaches, a lot of good approaches, we wanted to take this opportunity to kind of clarify our perspective and our approach to understanding the differences and the similarities, the connections between organizational culture and employee engagement. So I want to make a few comments to get this started about our perspective. Then I want to turn things over to Lindsey to talk about the work that we've done developing our engagement measures and our other modules that are a complement to the basic approach that we're taking with corporate culture, and then show some of the research that we've done with that, a few of the implications, and then we're delighted to have such a large group online today, so I'm sure we're going to get lots of great questions that Karen will help us sort through so that we can spend the last 15 or 20 minutes on your questions and your issues. And as Karen said, I want to reiterate, if we aren't able to get to your question during this discussion, we'll be sure to follow up with you directly by phone or by email. So the first comment I'd like to make is that if you dial the clock back several decades, we still had employee attitude surveys. Years ago, they might have been called that, an attitude survey, a satisfaction survey. One of the things that we see today is that most employee attitude surveys are referred to as the engagement survey. The core is on the individual's reaction to the environment in the workplace. It's the bond between the individual and the organization, viewed from the individual's point of view. But there are often a lot of other additions. The engagement survey with engagement at the core often has a lot of complementary topics that are added in or are built around that. This may focus on the vision and values of the organization or the understanding of the purpose and the mission. It may be individual job satisfaction or commitment or likelihood to stay in the organization, recommend it to a friend, or seek out another job. Organizations also have a lot of custom content, things that are very specific to the individual corporation, and that the survey is a great opportunity to get broad-based input from around the world on important issues in the organization today. Some engagement surveys also include a piece on rewards. Sometimes there are questions that focus in on individual leaders, their capabilities, understanding of the strategy, and sometimes there are also engagement surveys that are closely modeled on some of the best places to work surveys, where the purpose of those most often is for the organization to gain recognition as one of the best employers in their industry or their country, and to use that to better gain visibility and attract attention from the workplace so that they can, from the labor market, so that they can attract the best people to their organization. So there's a wide range of things that go on under the heading of an engagement survey. So there's some clutter in this, and again, it's good clutter for the most part. And what we want to do today is kind of clarify some of the basic aspects of our approach to this. And this issue of the additions, there are many more than this. The list could go on and on. So there's a lot of choices that as HR professionals, as organization development and learning and development professionals, a lot of choices that you have to make when you're doing a survey of your people. The most basic distinction is one that's been around for a long time. You know, our friend and colleague Edgar Schein, before he became a culture guru, wrote a lot about organizational psychology. And he's one of the people that really helped to define it as a discipline that focused on three levels: individuals, teams, and organizations. So the most basic distinction between corporate culture and engagement is this distinction between level, between the individual level. Engagement is about the individual's perception of the work environment. It's a construct at the individual level. It's about how individuals feel about themselves and their work. And it ends up being a pretty good predictor of individual job performance. There's a lot of research on that. There are some mixed results, but in general, individual engagements very useful for predicting individual job performance. Organizational culture, on the other hand, is an organization-level construct. It's about the system. It's about the way that we do things around here. It's about the character of the organization that's been created over time, not only by the leaders, although they certainly have a major hand in creating the culture of an organization over time. But it's not only them. It's also the interaction with all the members of the organization as they build a system, as they build a mindset, a logic, kind of what Gerd Hofstede called the software of the mind. That is the strategy that they've put into action that helps govern how they can compete in their marketplace. Surveys of organizational culture are often more about how the individual experiences the organization, how they perceive the organization, because the purpose of the culture items is to try to characterize the organization and how it works. And that's certainly true of the questions in our corporate culture survey, that the questions are about how the individuals see the different aspects of the organization to try to characterize the system. So it's quite different from the impact that the system has on the individual, although they're, of course, closely connected. Our experience and our research shows that the measures of the system are the best predictors of firm performance, particularly over the long term. That's actually why I chose this path for my research career, is I did research early on in the 1980s that showed that the survey measures of the organizational system were a better predictor of performance over time than were the survey measures of the individual satisfaction with that system. So the level distinction is one of the most basic things about the difference between organizational culture and engagement. And this diagram tries to, to lay this out. On the top of the diagram, the culture has an impact on the performance of the firm. The system that we build is what has the biggest impact on the survival, the success of the firm over time. And individual engagement on the bottom definitely has, an impact on individual job performance. And of course, over time, without good individual job performance, you don't necessarily have good firm performance. So those two are linked as well. And one of the most basic influences on engagement of individuals is the organizational system that's been created. So the culture is a big impact on individuals' engagement or lack of engagement. And I put two arrows, one, a big one going down from culture to engagement, and a smaller one going back up from engagement to culture, because what the research shows, I believe, is that particularly over the short term, the system has a powerful impact on the individuals within it. Now, over the longer term, where does that system come from? Well, it's made up of the inputs of individuals, influenced by the engagement of those individuals. As Ben Schneider said, the people make the place. And this arrow that's going back up from engagement to culture is exactly that. Over time, the organization's made up of the people, their inputs, their contributions, their strategies, the lessons that they've learned. But over the short term, most often what you see is that the system influences engagement of the individuals. So this is the way that we tend to look at this, the interaction between these. And again, it's all rooted in the difference between the organization level system impacts, which we see as being culture, and the individual relationship to the organization, which is always at the core of engagement. Now, our approach to organizational culture is pretty familiar to most of you. If it isn't, we'd be glad to help you out with that. There's a lot of research, there's a lot of background, a lot of description in there. The core of it is built around our model of corporate culture and effectiveness, and the four core constructs: mission, adaptability, involvement, and consistency. These four concepts are the basis for the model, because the research showed that these four traits were the best predictors of firm performance over time. And this diagram just summarizes some of that research. External focus tends to be the best predictor of growth. Internal focus is better as a predictor of operating performance, quality, satisfaction, and engagement. And the left side of the model, adaptability and involvement, are good predictors of innovation and customer satisfaction. And the right side of the model, mission and consistency, are good descriptions of organizations with very strong brands that have stable performance over time. They have staying power. So the research that the model's based on, just gave one example here, of a study that showed that firms with higher culture scores have higher customer satisfaction ratings. So this is just an example of many different studies that we've done where we're linking these 4 culture traits to different measures of organizational performance and showing a pretty strong result in that, which we think is important because that helps leaders to focus in on those aspects of a system that they've created that are most likely to have a direct impact on the performance of the organization. So that's the background on culture. That's familiar to you. You may be less familiar with the approach that we've taken to employee engagement. So I want to turn things to Lindsey Kotrba. Lindsey and her R&D team have contributed so much to developing our approach to measuring employee engagement, as well as the other modules that we are linked to culture and linked to engagement that we're also creating. So Lindsey, over to you.
Thank you, Dan. So as Dan mentioned, part of what we wanted to do today was expose you to Denison's approach to employee engagement, which may be a little bit less familiar to you than our approach to organizational culture. And so really we define engagement as the degree to which individuals in an organization are involved, committed, and psychologically invested in their work, their job, and their organization. As Dan mentioned, employee engagement is an individual-level construct, which is a good predictor of individual-level outcomes, such as job satisfaction, loyalty, things like that. We measure engagement in several ways. One of those ways is through our engagement module, which I will talk about in a little bit more detail. Our additional modules, as Dan mentioned, we have several additional modules as well, and also through client custom questions. So to give you a little bit of a better idea of what we're talking about when we talk about our employee engagement module. Our employee engagement module is a brief survey which was designed to complement the information already assessed in the organizational culture survey, which can be added to the organizational culture survey to kind of take a deeper dive into the topic of employee engagement. So our organizational culture survey assesses things, as Dan mentioned, at the organizational level. It includes concepts that are often measured in employee engagement surveys, such as empowerment and capability development and things like that, but does so from the organization level. When we designed the employee engagement module, the idea was to focus specifically on asking individuals at the individual level how they feel about their job and about their organization. The module assesses discretionary effort, enthusiasm, and pride, and again was designed to kind of take a deeper dive into the topic of employee engagement and to complement the information that's already provided in the organizational culture assessment, and you can see the 5 items there on the screen. Our employee engagement module is benchmarked as well as reliable and valid. Our benchmark currently has 104 organizations, although we update that quarterly and usually gain about 20 to 30 organizations per quarter, so it's a rapidly growing benchmark. We currently have close to 13,000 respondents. 73% of those are headquartered in North America, but we have a decent chunk of multinational organizations in the benchmark, so close to 30% of respondents are actually from outside of the United States. A wide variety of industries are represented, and we do have a more detailed validation report available on the employee engagement module as well as on the benchmark if that's of interest. So in addition to this module, we frequently work with clients to incorporate custom questions addressing specific topics that are of interest to them. Our R&D team is well-versed and very interested in working with clients to create items to assess topics that will complement both the culture assessment and the module, to map previous survey initiatives to our offerings to see where there's overlap, to see where there's concepts that aren't addressed by the survey and the modules that we offer, so we can assess those items through custom questions. We can create internal benchmarks for custom questions as external benchmarks for custom questions aren't available. We can do predictive modeling, kind of showing how these custom questions relate to the modules as well as to the culture survey. And this is something we do frequently and enjoy, and is an important part of our offering and engagement. In addition to the engagement module, we also have additional modules which are all benchmarked, all reliable, and all valid, assessing topics that complement the docs and are of interest to our clients. Our most recently developed module is on employee commitment. This module measures employees' attachment to and behavioral intent to stay with the organization. Currently, this module is in pilot. The 10 pilot items are listed and available on the screen, and again, we have additional information available on this as well. Employee commitment is a topic that is pretty highly related to employee engagement, and a lot of kind of standard or typical employee engagement surveys will actually include items that kind of fit the construct of employee commitment or intent to stay. And so this new module is also an important part of our employee engagement offering. Some of the other modules that we have available include organizational trust. So our trust module assesses the concepts of honesty, openness, and integrity, as well as benevolence and compassion, and again kind of complements the reliability and capability components of trust that are already pretty well captured within the consistency and involvement traits of the core Denison Culture Survey. Trust, again, is also a highly related concept to employee engagement. Innovation is another module that we have available. Our innovation module was designed to specifically get at the creativity and implementation aspects of the innovation process, and again is fully benchmarked, reliable, and a valid instrument. So as a brief overview of our offerings in the employee engagement area, I would also like to share with you what we've been doing to investigate the relationship between organizational culture and employee engagement. In order to do so, we've conducted some analyses on a sample of 90 organizations that have used both our organizational culture assessment and our 5-item employee engagement module, which I shared with you a little bit earlier. And I'd like to walk through some of the results from these analyses. So, looking first at the bigger picture relationship, in our sample of 90 organizations, we identified the bottom 10 scoring organizations on the Denison Culture Survey, and their culture profile is shown on the left. We also identified the top 10 scoring organizations on the Denison Culture Survey, and their composite profile is shown on the right. We found that the lower scoring organizations had an overall engagement score in the 11th percentile, while the top 10 scoring organizations in culture had an overall engagement score in the 83rd percentile. These results at a high level suggest that there's a strong relationship between the health of an organization's culture and their employees' individual level of engagement. We also wanted to dig a little bit deeper to see what specific aspects of culture as measured by the Denison model most strongly related to engagement. So in order to do this, we correlated each line item of the docs with overall engagement factor scores and found 4 key survey items that most strongly correlate to employee engagement. 2 of those items actually came from the mission trait. So one from vision, our vision creates excitement and motivation for our employees, and another from the strategic direction and intent index. There is a clear mission that gives meaning and direction to our work. Another item came from the empowerment index of the involvement trait. Everyone believes that he or she can have a positive impact. And the 4th came actually from the core values index of the consistency trait. And was the item, the leaders and managers practice what they preach. So in general, these results suggest that an organization with a compelling vision and a clear mission and an environment where employees feel like they can make a difference will also more likely have a highly engaged workforce. These results also suggest that when the management or leaders in an organization act in congruence with their words, employees are willing to give more and are more passionate about what they do. In addition, using multiple regression analyses, we found that the Denison model traits that were the strongest predictors of engagement were, first, strongest predictor was the core values index and the consistency trait of the model, followed by empowerment, then vision, and capability development. So those are the 4 strongest index predictors of overall levels of employee engagement as measured through our 5-item engagement module. It's probably not too surprising to see the indexes of empowerment and capability development show up as predictors of engagement because these indexes get at concepts that are often captured in employee engagement surveys, such as how involved or committed are most individuals in the organization, is the organization making an effort to develop the skills of its employees. Somewhat a little bit more surprising, and I think actually very interesting, the core values index was the strongest predictor of engagement. So of all the factors that can influence employee engagement from the organizational level, the behaviors embodied in core values can have the most significant impact. This includes having a clear and consistent set of values, having a characteristic management style, and having leaders and managers practice what they preach. So each of these are important to the pride, enthusiasm, and commitment of your employees and are important areas to focus on if you find your employee engagement scores are low. So in general, I'll turn things back over to Dan, and he can kind of give us a broad level summary of where things stand.
Okay, thanks, Lindsey. That was great. The several conclusions that we draw from this and points to clarify, and then we'll move to some general questions and answers here. I think the first one is that as you're doing your work in organizations, it's very important to kind of clarify the importance of individual level and organization level issues. Is the purpose of a survey to take the temperature of the organization, make sure everything is okay, understand what's going on down there, take a snapshot, or is the intent that the results should lead to action? One of the reactions that people have had to our work for years now, for 15 or 20 years, is that they like it because it's actionable. The experience that I've had with working with surveys and with clients where they've only focused on the individual and their reaction is a real quandary about what to do. Where's the leverage? How do we have an impact? What do we do to make a difference? In one organization that I worked in that had done a what they called an engagement survey that was very focused on the individual satisfaction, engagement, commitment, reaction to the work, I was talking with a group of executives who were saying, well, yes, we understand that in this part of the organization, these people have a disengaged staff, and over here they have an engaged staff, but we don't understand very clearly what to do to change that. What approach do we take? Is it about the the parties that we have over the holidays? Is it about the visibility of managers in the workplace? Is it about the clarity of the direction of the organization, or how flexible and responsive we are? Where's the leverage? How do you start to change that? And so I think that there's a big difference between a survey that's designed to take the temperature, which can be very important, and in a sense, it's almost like the baseline obligation in many organizations that each year everybody gets a chance to have their say about the organization, their job, the work environment that they're in, and this is taken pretty seriously. The other side of that, though, is that I think it's very important that a survey project gives the leaders and managers, top to bottom in the organization, a good sense of where's the leverage, where can they make a difference, and what's most actionable in a way that's going to improve not only the work environment of their people, but also the performance of the business. So I think that's the first point, is to clarify the importance of the individual level and the organization level issues. What we've heard from the marketplace over many years about our work is one of the reasons they like it is because it's actionable, and that's important. Second thing I would say here is to benchmark wherever you can. There's a lot of appeal to a custom approach to asking a set of questions that are carefully tailored to the individual's firm, the situation that they're in, and a lot of good work goes on in organizations where you're crafting a set of questions that directly address the unique issues in that organization. On the other hand, a lot of the work that's about custom questions also ends up asking questions that are very similar to questions that have been asked in a lot of different organizations, except there's no benchmark, there's no external point of comparison. Sometimes in organizations, you find that executives get quite involved in writing, even in writing survey questions. My years of experience suggests that most top corporate executives aren't chosen for the role because they're good at writing survey questions. They're good at identifying the issues that these questions should address. But many times if you go strictly in the direction of a custom approach, results are very difficult to interpret because all you have are mean scores, percent favorable response, and there's no benchmarking, so there's very little chance of understanding what the real strengths and weaknesses are of the organization. Custom questions can be very good for comparing different parts of an organization. If you're comparing divisions, countries, functions, levels, custom questions can be great for that because there the comparison's good. But there are limits to customization. One time we bid on a large project with a major corporation and we lost. We were very disappointed. And the reason they gave us for picking someone else other than us is that they liked the definition of engagement that this competing firm gave them. 6 months later, I ran into one of the people that had been involved with that project and asked how they were doing. And they said, well, 6 months later, there still is a discussion between the vendor and the client about what is engagement, what definition of engagement are we going to use. So I think that's an example of how you can go too far down the customization road, and there's really no reason to. We have a lot of projects where we're trying to have our cake and eat it too, along with our clients. You want to have material that's unique to the organization that you can track carefully, but you also want to have an external standard of comparison. That's one of the benefits of a benchmarking process. I think the third point is to plan the feedback and action planning part of the project at the beginning. If we don't think through the expectations for action and how the managers and executives throughout the organization are going to translate the results into action, it usually doesn't happen very well. I think that as organizations focus more of their time on areas of action and maybe a bit less of their time on developing unique custom content, I think then you see more impact and more value being created. So there's a bit of a dilemma here in the last, conclusion, is that long-term we need to build the system. We need to understand the characteristics of an effective organization and how to build those for the future. And that implies that you take an approach that looks somewhat like the approach we take to corporate culture, where we're trying to characterize the system, the strengths and the challenges relative to a benchmark, and use those to focus the priorities of the organization, its leaders, and its members. Now, short term, we also need to understand the reaction of individuals. So we don't want to ignore that perspective at all. Quite the contrary. We want to capture both of these because we need both the long-term and short-term perspective. We need both the organization level and the individual approach. So those are our comments, both as an overview, a specific look at some of the things that we're doing with respect to employee engagement and how it compares to our work on corporate culture. But I know you've got some good conclusions and some good questions to this webinar as well. So maybe if we turn things back to Karen for a minute, she can pick some of the questions that we can respond to.
Thank you, Dan. Starting from a very broad level, what external factors or what impact do their external factors, things like the economy, have we seen any impact from those on either organizational culture or employee engagement in their scores with an organization?
Great question. And there's several points I'd raise about this. One is with respect to our own corporate culture measures over this period of the last couple of years. We had one of our clients in the end of 2009 who didn't get quite the results that they were hoping for. And they came back to us and said, well, surely every organization that's taken your survey during 2009 has experienced a decline from what they saw in 2008 or 2007. And we said, well, let's have a look. Makes sense to us, but let's have a look. So we went and we put together a sample of organizations where we had data at 2 points in time: 2007, 2009, 2008, 2009, 2006. And to our surprise, we saw quite a mix in there. Yes, we did see organizations that had declined in their culture scores in that period of time. But we also saw organizations that had improved. We saw quite a mix. And as we begin to scratch our heads and try to sort this out, we started to ask questions like, how about goals and objectives? Does it make sense that during hard times, during an economic crisis and decline, that our goals and objectives would get less clear and that would be normal? No, we kind of saw exactly the opposite in a lot of cases, where the tough times force a lot more clarity. with respect to the organization, its goals. How about the customer? Well, you know, there's actually some interesting research evidence showing that customer satisfaction improved a little bit overall in 2009. Why? Well, because firms had fewer customers. They were working hard to get them. They were working hard to keep the ones that they had. They were going the extra mile day in and day out to help their own customers stay in business. So we haven't seen an overall decline in the scores that tracks directly with the economy. I think on the employee engagement side, you see a little different story, because there the question is less about how it's affected the organization as a whole and more about how it's affected individuals, their security in their job, their likelihood to leave for a new job, and those results are a little mixed too. Overall, you see organizations that are struggling and are losing people, declining business. Obviously, they're less attractive workplaces. They're more difficult situations. So, you know, I think you can expect that there would be some decline in the level of engagement. But we also have seen a lot of firms that said, you know, that recognized that employees did not have as many choices in this environment as they did, you know, when the economy was better. So while I think you may see a decline in the, you know, kind of the psychological bond between the individual and the organization, brought about by tough economic times, the behavioral intentions to leave, actually that one's pushed the other way. So, you know, to summarize, we haven't seen a big dip in culture scores. We would expect that engagement would decline a bit during this time, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people's commitment or likelihood to seek a new job would have changed that much. Mm-hmm. That's our perspective. But.
Taking a little bit deeper into that, are there demographic factors that impact a person's level of engagement or their level of or their scores on an organizational culture survey, things like tenure, their level within the organization, and how they'll view the culture or their commitment to the organization?
Yeah, one of the things that we always look at carefully in any organization is how the results look across level. I think that what we find with respect to the person's tenure in the organization mirrors exactly what you see in the literature in general, is that people's satisfaction, commitment, engagement starts strong with new employees, you know, starts to decline after 3, 4, 5 years, often continues to decline until people kind of make a career decision. I'm here, you know, to stay, and then it comes back up as they make that commitment. That one, our results, you know, directly mirror what you see in the literature. But let me speak a bit more to the differences that we see across level. On average, when we compare results across levels of organizations, we would expect to see a small drop as you go from the top of the organization to the front line. And that might be 5 percentile points from one level to the next, maybe 10, 15 as you look top to bottom. When we see more than that, we see 20, 30, 40, 50 percentile point difference in the scores as we move top to bottom, that signals a lack of alignment. So we've spent a lot of attention these last few years with some of our client organizations like JetBlue or Hertz, trying to understand what can organizations do to best support the front line. Because in fact, if you have that kind of a demographic difference in the organization, that's a sign of a lack of alignment, which makes it very difficult for an organization to implement its strategy. I don't know, would you add anything else in terms of what you've seen in demographics? I mean, you've also done some great research on gender differences here.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that a little bit, every time we do an update of any of our normative databases on any of the modules, on the culture survey and our leadership survey as well, we do extensive analyses of demographic differences. So we look at if there's differences between levels, if there's differences between gender, things like that. And there are some interesting patterns, particularly looking at demographics such as gender or age, if you're looking at the leadership side of things. Looking at the culture side of things, it's a little bit different. So as Dan mentioned, you might see kind of small differences, you know, in the 5 to 10 percentile range, but across demographic groups, we don't tend to see differences larger than that. Within a particular organization, we might, and those differences are really interesting and can be really telling. So, you know, there might be large gender differences in a male-dominated industry, for example, that we wouldn't see in a female-dominated industry. When we look across organizations, those tend to wash out or balance out because they average out. But it's looking within a particular organization and the patterns within that organization. We do tend to see some interesting demographics that can be really telling about just the dynamics of what's going on within that organization.
Over and over again, client organizations will ask us questions like, well, isn't it normal just because we're in the financial services industry we'd see this pattern? Isn't it normal just because we're a South American organization that we would see this pattern? Isn't it normal that these demographic realities of the organization are really the ones driving the survey scores? And really the answer, and we've researched this a lot, the answer most of the time is no, it's not normal. It's about your organization, that you may have huge demographic differences by gender or by age or by region, by business, by function in a given organization. And that tells you a lot about the culture of that organization. That doesn't necessarily mean that across the board you see that pattern in the data in general.
Okay. And another interesting question has come in, and I want to word it the way one of our listeners has worded it. What does our data say about the percentage that leadership contributes to overall engagement, overall productivity, and overall organizational culture?
The percentage that leadership, that's, well, you know, in one way, I think you have to say that it's 100%. And I'm not being facetious here in the sense that, well, what creates the organizational system doesn't happen by accident. The individual, individual leaders and members of the organization over time, that's where the organization comes from. Organizations are human creations. Again, you know, I'll quote Ben Schneider, you know, the people make the place, and that involves leadership at all levels. And, you know, I think that if you ask the question about what percentage of the cultures created by people in formal management roles as opposed to the rest. You know, I think then if you look at the research and you look at the relationship between our Leadership 360 results and our organizational culture results, maybe it's a third. You can get a kind of a correlation or a regression equation that gives you that kind of a number. But what I would add to that is that it totally depends on how long they've been there and what they do. Some organizations, some leaders, change the face of history. Other leaders, vanish in the night without a trace, and everything in between. One of the things that we notice too is that when you see a new leader go into an organization, particularly with a challenging situation, a turnaround, a crisis, you see a big gap between what the individual leader's doing and what the organization is comfortable doing and what the organization is, the traditions the organization has built up over time. Now, if you look at an organization where they've had the same leader in place for 10 years, there the organization's much more of a reflection of the leader, but that happens over longer periods of time. I don't know, were there things you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think you really kind of hit the nail on the head, because again, at an overall level, we might be able to say 15 to 20%, but there's so many it depends in that number. So the first thing that comes to mind, as Dan kind of touched on, is time frame. So that 15 to 20% will vary vastly if you're looking at a leader that's been in place 2 months versus one that's been in place 15 years. So, on average, maybe that's 15 to 20%, but really the time frame is so important, because a leader's impact doesn't happen right away. I think the other important thing is level. So how close in proximity is the leader to the particular individuals making the ratings of the culture, making the ratings of engagement? Are you looking at a CEO to the broader organization relationship? Or are you looking at individual leaders of a department to those members of that department? And again, that broad percent, 15 to 20%, is going to vary different, vary pretty vastly depending on how you're looking at that relationship. And probably the structure of the overall organization, too. Is it very hierarchical with lots of levels, or is it more matrix? Yeah, and it's very interesting research, but it's actually pretty complicated research to do for a lot of reasons. So a couple of the reasons that I just mentioned, but also, having an apples-to-apples comparison, or being able to look at skills, behaviors, and characteristics of a leader in a way that's consistent with the skills, behaviors, characteristics of an organization, or attitudes of the individuals within that organization, to be able to actually put a number to that is also pretty difficult.
Yeah, and I think that from a research side, we've put a lot of effort into looking for that number and a lot of other numbers too. I think on a practice side, though, it's important to, let go on the search for the number and focus in on the real issue. Most important one is, what's the leader's role in building the culture of an organization, and how does that fit into their business leadership role? And I think that one of the impacts that we have had through our work is to make leaders, particularly those that are kind of learning their trade, that are growing and developing through their career, to understand the importance of building a system, of building an organization that has some staying power. At the end of their career, executives, leaders are really struck by the legacy that they've left in their organization. But it's important to remember that you start leaving that legacy as soon as you start trying to lead. And that leaders who develop the capability to build systems and to empower and engage people, larger groups of people all the time through their career in pursuit of the directions of their business, and look at that in terms of how they have an impact, where they gain leverage as a leader, the importance of the symbolic role, so that their leadership has strong influence over people that goes far beyond their individual presence. I think that's a really important question too. How do leaders build effective cultures?
You know, there are so many great questions that I know we're not going to get to, but I do want to take us in a little bit more of a tactical avenue for our last question. There's a lot of questions that have been sent in that regard timing. When do you do a culture survey versus when do you do an engagement survey? And so can you clarify about a little bit about Denison's approach and how we view actually completing the survey, the engagement culture survey?
You see a lot of different combinations there. Well, let's go back to this point of what's the purpose? Action or taking the temperature. Many organizations, if they're taking the temperature, will be pretty content with doing the survey less frequently, 2 years, some even, even 3. Organizations that are trying to change, improve, build, take action tend to do it more frequently. I always ask client organizations how many metrics do they measure every other year, or every 18 months, or every 3 years. And they say, gee, not very many. If we want accountability, we want to measure things regularly, usually on an annual basis, so that we can track action and accountability. So I think that there's a case for either kind of a longer or a shorter period of time, depending on the purpose of the survey. A lot of our effort has actually gone into action planning and monitoring change that people do on even shorter cycles than that, 3 to 6 months. If I decide in my role as a leader that doing better at building teams or clarifying the vision is the area where I need to improve, we'll often come back in 3 to 6 months to see if the needle's moved by using a change monitor, shorter survey, mini survey, because the purpose of that is accountability and taking action. We also work with client organizations that do culture 1 year and engagement the next. We work with a couple of them that do both surveys each year. Generally, we try to encourage them to do one event rather than multiple events. And it's simpler in terms of measurement, data collection, although you have to be, you have to make sure that it's short enough that it's not, a huge survey. And I think the most important thing with respect to timing is to always go back, where does it fit into your planning cycle? in the organization. Because if the information requires us to create a different planning and action cycle unique to that survey, that's a lot of work. And we find the best impact in our work comes when the survey cycle, whether it's called culture, engagement, or whatever, fits in a thoughtful way into the existing planning cycle of an organization and informs the priorities for action.
And just to clarify a little bit about the development of the modules as well. So our modules are brief 5 to 7 item scales that were specifically designed to complement the information provided in the culture survey. So they weren't designed as standalone survey assessments, as standalone engagement assessment, as a standalone trust or commitment assessment. They were designed by taking a look at the information that's provided in the culture survey and thinking about how that can be specifically expanded on or added to dive a little bit deeper into a specific topic. So they were really designed to, again, complement the information and not a standalone assessment. So the modules in particular work best with the information, or are most impactful when looked at with the information that you obtain from taking the culture survey. And as you could see from the research that we went through and the dynamics between organizational level metrics and individual level metrics, they're very related concepts, and there are strong relationships between the concepts measured in the culture survey and the concepts measured in the modules. And so it's really important to kind of look at those two pieces of information together and the dynamics between them to get a cohesive picture of what's going on in the organization.
So I guess we've used up our hour here, and so we want to respect your schedule. Before we hand things back to Karen to wrap up, I'd just like to thank you for joining us today. If you have other questions, if you have reactions, comments, suggestions, please be in touch. We'll look through all of the questions that we didn't get to today, and maybe we can put together some responses to those. And if we do, we'd be glad to send that out to all of you so you can get a picture of the whole range of questions and interest that people have today. But thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Back to Karen.
Thank you, Dan and Lindsay, and thank you all of us for joining us today. This is our last webinar of 2010, and we wish you all of the best and happiest of holidays. We'd like to personally invite you to join us in January at our Best Practices Forum in Delray Beach, Florida. So if you're in some cold weather and like to get some warm weather for a few days, we'd love to have you there. You can see our sunny beach there. If you'd like to have some more information about that, please feel free to give us a call. We have a great lineup of speakers talking about their organizations and how they've used Denison, but more importantly, how they've changed the culture and improved their organizations or developed their leaders within their organizations. So that's going to be January 26th through the 28th in Delray Beach, Florida. And again, thank you for joining us today. We will resume our monthly webinars in February, and at that point we will have Stuart Friedman. He is a professor at the Wharton School of Business, and he is the author of Total Leadership, and he will be joining us to speak about leadership. So thank you all. Have a wonderful holiday season, and we will see you in February or in January.
Thank you.
Thanks.